Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Nikon Creators Hour. I'm your host, Mike Corrado. I've been with Nikon for 36 years, and we are here doing a special segment for the Creators Hour called On Assignment, where we're actually talking to photographers who have used either the Z6 II or the Z7 II on assignment. We're going to get their first impressions, talk to them about creative, talk to them about their settings and how they approach things, the Z Nikkor lenses they have used. And with us today, we have the lovely Charmy Pena. How are you, Charmy?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. And by the way, those of you tuning in, there's a chat box below. If you have any questions, we've got Nikon techs on site waiting to answer them for you. So along the way, if there's anything about the Z6 II you want to learn, please ask in the chat box below. So now that we got the formalities out of the way, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good. I'm excited to talk about my assignment.
Good. I'm glad. It's nice to see you again. I feel like we haven't seen each other in person in a really long time, but we have done this Zoom thing a couple of times, which is great. And then our group ambassador talk. So those of you who don't know that, Charmy is a wedding photographer extraordinaire. She is a Nikon ambassador, and she has used the Z6 II. So we're going to get the real world skinny here today, the scoop on how she has done this assignment she's worked on. But first and foremost, as always, talk a little bit to the people out there that may not know who Charmy Pena is and a little bit about your photo background.
So I'm a wedding photographer based out of Princeton, New Jersey. The majority of weddings that I shoot are big South Asian Indian weddings. They're multi-day. So when I shoot one wedding, I'm really shooting for 4 days. And I already forgot the rest of your question because I am...
Well, how did you get started in your career as a photographer?
So on my wedding day, my husband gave me a camera and I was in between jobs. I double majored economics and IT in college, and I really hated any sort of cubicle option. And so I just didn't have a job at the time. And he gifted me a camera and I shoved it in the back of my closet because I was like intimidated. I didn't know how to use it. So but during that job hunting time, I was incredibly bored, and I'm not the kind of person who can just sit and do nothing. Soap operas and bonbons are just not enough for me. So I pulled the camera out and I decided I was going to learn to use it. And literally it was a love affair, and we haven't been apart since.
That's beautiful. Why weddings, though? Listen, I take my hat off to anybody that want to challenge themselves to shoot a wedding. It's a very difficult thing to do, especially the pressure of capturing somebody's day. And then you talk about it being multi-day, and that adds an even bigger pressure because the fatigue factor kicks in. Why weddings? Why Indian weddings?
You know, I didn't start out with weddings. I started with kids, and I was like, oh, kids seems like I'm going to have a good life schedule. So I'll just photograph kids, and they're low stress. And very early on, when I was photographing kids, I had a bride who saw photos I took of twin babies. And she came to me and said, like, you're going to shoot my wedding. And I told her I absolutely was not going to shoot her wedding. She's like, no, you are. And she insisted, and she was so sweet. And so I shot her wedding, and then it was published in The Knot. And that was my first wedding. So it just kind of happened. And then, you know, a lot of growing a photography business, especially a wedding business, is about networking and the people you know. And so Indian weddings just came naturally to me. It's the culture I grew up in. It's the culture I love. It's the people I know. So it came as like a perfect fit for my personality as well. And yes, 4 days is tiring, but there's so much exciting stuff happening. And if you're attracted to documentary photography, Indian weddings just have so much to chew on.
Beautiful. Anybody tuning in right now, if you missed it before, we got a chat box below, so please put in your questions about the Z6 II. We're here talking with Charmy Pena, wedding photographer, and she's giving us her first-hand experience using the Z6 II. I know you've been using Z Nikkor and Z mirrorless cameras prior to this. I believe the Z6 and Z7. So we definitely want to talk to you about your concepts, the creative, again, dig into the camera settings that you used as we move forward. But everything always starts with a first impression, right? So you've been using mirrorless up to this point, the Z system. What's the first impressions when the Z6 II is put into your hands for the first time?
So I actually did not even see it until the morning of my shoot.
We like to keep it that way, the challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, you get a little concerned that you're going into a shoot and you might not know exactly, I've made mistakes before with a fresh camera where I forget to change the settings to what I want it to be. But I had the camera handed to me and I was like, I know this camera, like this camera and I are besties already. We're going to be fine. And so for me, it was a really pleasant surprise to see that everything that I love about the camera was still exactly the way that I wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm. What are the things about the camera that just sort of caught you in the moment when you started maneuvering around the camera?
When I started playing with it and opening it, and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the first thing, I don't know why, but I went through my focus modes first. And the first thing I noticed is a new focus mode. And I think it's called wide area AF.
IAF, yep.
IAF, yeah. And that for me is pretty life altering for shooting a wedding day. You know, when you have a bride coming down the aisle, you also have a ton of other faces on the side. And if you're just using auto area AF for eye focus, it may catch the wrong eye. And yes, you can toggle, but anytime you're shooting a wedding, you want it to be as fast as possible. And so being able to choose like a general zone, that's going to change so much for me to say like, here's the general area I want you to find an eye in. I think for wedding photographers, that's going to change how fast we work. And anything that makes our jobs quicker is amazing. So that was the first thing I noticed. The second thing I noticed was 2 card slots.
Why are you smiling?
I don't know.
Listen, I know how important that has got to be for you as a wedding photographer, but take it away.
It's that and I've used the Z6 for this entire year because there's just so much about mirrorless that, especially in this current weird situation that we're in, is very helpful. Being able to shoot reliably without your camera to your face and many other things. But I think, having that security for a day that cannot be repeated is fantastic. And so, and also makes it, I'm a little bit of a storage nerd. And so for me to have 2 card slots, especially the way that the Z6 II is set up, to have an SD slot, that means that I really don't have to reformat that SD card until that wedding is delivered. And so it gives me this like automatic extra backup that just sits in a card wallet for an extended period of time, because those are, SDs are cheap enough that I can just keep swapping them out for every wedding. And so really it assists in my workflow. It's like a security measure, but it also makes my workflow easier. And so I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I found that too. And depending on who you're shooting, just recently I did a portrait setting situation, and having that second card slot, I just dumped the very low res JPEGs on that second card. And instead of having to go home, upload them to Nikon's image space, invite them into a gallery, here's the SD card, run away, tell me the pictures that you love, and I'll go to some edit. And to me, that's the functionality. I tend to use it a lot for overflow, because shooting so many pictures in wildlife or sports or drummers, I tend to overshoot quite a bit. So I use it for that. But it is nice. So talk a little bit about this assignment now and what your concept was, how you put this all together. So anybody out there, when we're about to review these images, and they are gorgeous images, where do you get started?
So, my parameters are pretty broad. Shoot some wedding photos and have fun. So I started with, where do I want to make this happen? And so I already knew immediately that I wanted this color palette to be a little bit muted and calm, because I wanted the detail to show without too much bold color distracting from it. I really wanted to like play with detail. And so I thought someplace that was a little bit of a cross of lots of green, but lots of, texture and rusticness would be nice. And so I looked for all kinds of farms. I looked through everything, and I came upon this place in Queens, New York, actually, that that was a greenhouse. And so the walls were brick, and they had ivy growing up them, and the top was all glass, and it was perfect. It used to be a metal foundry, and now it's just, you know, a place you can shoot, and it has an Airbnb, and it's great. And so the light, I knew the light would be a little bit challenging because, you know, while non-photographers might walk into a room that has a clear roof and be like, oh my God, there's so much light in here, I already knew that the direction of that light was going to be a challenge, but the room was so great. I knew that it would make a good fit for these like somewhat neutral colors I wanted to use, and like, you know, be perfect to show off detail against.
Beautiful. Well, while we're talking about this, give a little shout out to Mark Cutler, who, you know, it's not everybody gets the senior manager of product marketing to come with them on a shoot. So you certainly had the guy with all the answers in case you had any questions, but that familiarity to me is so critical. Buttons, menus, position, even though there's new stuff. And I love the way you explained the wide area IAF, because now in this camera, not only do you have animal AF, you have IAF for people, you have them both in the video mode too. So if you're a video person, that's a great advantage here too. But to have that, you know, senior manager of product marketing with you, that's like having the instruction book, isn't it?
Yeah.
But let's dive into these pictures, because I'm sure everybody would much rather see your pictures than listen to me. And let's ramp up this show, and we'll bring it up full screen. And take us on the journey here, you know, talk a little bit along the way about the camera settings, the lens that you used, what your thought was in setting this up. You always have this exotic set of flowers or something big in your photos. You take it away from here. Talk to us about these images.
You know me so well. I love extra. And so when I talked to my friend about creating the set for me, I told him I wanted, you know, whites and pinks and creams, but I wanted it to be texturally really exciting and have a lot of detail in it. And so he literally painted those. Those are leaves. Those are green leaves typically. He hand painted those, and that's why they're white. They're pink and silver. That's how that happened. Once he set this up for me, I immediately knew that, you know, we were going to be okay on the vision, which was I wanted to keep the colors kind of, you know, where they were, but still have so much detail jumping out. And I think that's definitely what we got. So this is definitely with the 35. I used a Nikkor S, right? 35?
S series, yep. 35, 1.8.
Yeah. And I think we're probably at f2.8 or 4 here. I didn't want to go completely shallow because I really wanted, you know, the flowers to still pop. And just like funny side note, that's actually my sari that we had folded in a very creative way on her so that it looks like a pant outfit. But it's from my wedding.
Oh, that's it. So it's extra special now too.
Yeah.
As we move forward, you're probably going to tell me this, that you shoot raw, right? Most of the time?
I always, I shoot raw. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what are some of the other settings? What do you do in the way of color balance or, you know, white balance settings, things like that?
So what I found really, actually, when I was reviewing these images yesterday, I noted that I used auto white balance the entire shoot, and it was only one single image that I had to adjust for white balance. The auto white balance was so on point that there was no need to dial in a Kelvin or to pick a different option. Although this, you know, especially with mirrorless, it's so easy to get it right because, you know, you can just dial in a Kelvin and the EVF is so accurate that you can trust that whatever you're seeing is really what you're going to get. But auto white balance, and I always have it set to keep warm tones, and that's it. The auto white balance was so dead on that I didn't have to mess with it. I shoot in AV mode a decent amount of the time just because I use exposure compensation very generously. And so actually I had to change the settings in the camera because if you want to use exposure compensation really, really easily, there is a setting in the camera called easy exposure compensation, and it's not standard. You have to go in there and turn it on. And so I think our friend did that for me. And yeah, so I think that is the majority of my basic settings. And for this, you know, face and eye focus weren't going to work. And so, but I really wanted her face to be in focus versus the veil. And so I used the pinpoint focus.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a great mode that came out with Z mirrorless in the first generation. I know a lot of people turn to that to get that precision on the eye or eyelashes, or, you know, in a certain part of the frame. And, you know, what you bring up, it reminds me, I used to work in a showroom, and I'm going to date myself a little bit. And I worked in the electronic imaging department before we started calling it digital. It was electronic imaging department. I sat next to a color scientist. And what you say reminds me to bring up the fact that now this camera's got dual processors. The engineers really went to work on here. So with dual processors, you can have multifunction things happening, you know, processes happening simultaneously. But more importantly, it's like the color science behind this. You don't see this on a spec sheet. You don't see this on the website, you know, until you have the chance to experience it, because it's all numbers, right? It's all specs, until you, like you said, could see those images inside your computer, you know, as they come up on your computer. And the other thing I'm looking at in a shot like this is the edge-to-edge sharpness. And that's another thing, the mount of Z. You know, the engineers really precisely manufactured this, designed this for optical sharpness all the way through the frame, not just in the center. And I can see that in this image, but it's a beautiful start. And I love the backstory about the fact that that was part of your wedding ensemble, your wedding clothing. I love this picture. I love these kinds of sets where, you know, you're not afraid to expose what else is going on, and it creates the environment. Talk a little bit about this photo as we move forward.
So we moved into this room, and on one side we set up all those flowers, and on the other side, there was nothing going on just yet, but I knew that I wanted to see everything that was happening, but I also wanted it to stand out a little bit. And I love these things where it looks like, oh, you set up a set, but that's not quite, you know, like you said. So I had her stand up on this chair, and I had her. So funny story, these two got engaged a week before they came to model for me.
Nice.
I had asked them to model for me. They agreed to do it. And then the next day they got engaged. And so they were particularly sweet for the shoot. But I really wanted to show off so much about Indian weddings is very royal and regal feeling. And I try to elevate the woman in my work wherever I can. And so I literally decided to elevate her and put her on a chair and have him be ready to serve her.
There you go, Romeo and Juliet. It's like, you know, on your shoot. And that's great. Do you remember what lens you shot this with?
35.
You still with the 35-1.8
Yeah.
here? And
Yep.
what are you feeling now as you, listen, you said the camera was familiar to you. It's like, hey, I know this camera intimately. But as you're starting to shoot with, are you gaining confidence as you shoot? Talk a little bit about the AF. Are you using IAF here?
I was not using IAF here because, again, I really wanted to make sure I got in on her face and her detail, but also I think this may have been at F4 as well. I wasn't using IAF here, and that may not have been intentional. That may have been a carryover from the shot before. But yeah, I mean, I got into a rhythm with it, and that's part of the thing, right? Is you stop thinking about what you're doing. And when you can stop thinking about what you're doing and your camera is just responsive to you and you know it so well that you can just do what you need to do and not think about what you're doing and calculating every move. I think that's the camera you need to be with, because it's giving you everything you need to forget it's there. And I think
go ahead.
No, I think that happened very early on in the shoot where, you know, me and my camera were just the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious too. And it may sound a little weird to be even talking about this for everybody tuning in, which if you are tuning in, last chance probably to check in on the chat box below with any questions that you have, or write them in. We've got technical people standing online waiting for the questions so we can answer them quickly and efficiently. But, you know, I look at something like this, and one thing, I've shot both Z6 II and Z7 II as we came up to the launch of the camera. And I noticed a pop in the file, and you mentioned the color before. There was a crispness to the file that even in earlier cameras, as great as they were, you know, I felt like there was an evolution change. Speak to the image quality for what you're seeing, you know, through the computer or when you bring these images up in the computer.
So we actually, while we were shooting, we kept popping the photos out so that we could just take a look. You know, when you're doing something like this, you want to be 100% sure that every file is sharp and you don't, you know, you spent money on a location and on decor and on the models, and you don't want to go home and find out that, you know, you missed the shot. So, you know, throughout, I was shooting RAW. I was also shooting JPEG just so that I had a file to look at right away, because in these early files, you know, you can't see the RAW file.
Not everything's going to open an F file, right?
Yeah.
Correct. Until the software companies catch up. Yep.
Exactly. So I was shooting a side JPEG file just to take a look. But after every set, we would take it out on the computer and everybody would kind of socially distance huddle and take a look at these files. And, you know, immediately you could tell, A, they were all perfectly sharp. B, you know, the color was so beautiful that when I first sent these to be edited, I was like, I don't know that you really have to do a lot, you know? Like normally there's something to adjust, but these were pretty right on, right out of camera, which is very exciting because anytime you can do less work in post, that's thrilling.
Like you said, workflow.
Yeah. So, but you know, everyone who was on set would take a look at the files, and even the non-photographers were like, wow, that's sharp. That's amazing.
Beautiful. We're just going to keep going. I love the detail in this image. I know when I saw this take come in and we were looking at the selects, this is just gorgeous. Talk about this, the lens, anything that you want to talk about in the way of how you shot this.
So this was an 85. And this is the kind of shot that this whole shoot was planned around, right? I wanted the colors to kind of be in a monochromatic palette, but I really wanted you to see the detail of the jewelry and the detail of her henna on her hands. And I think it helped that they're a real couple who love each other very much. So they were very comfortable snuggling into each other. But the detail of the sari and the detail of the blouse, and we had kind of grabbed different pieces from different places. The ring is not from the same place as the necklace, is not from the same place as my sari and the blouse. And so, you know, it all just kind of came together. And I think I kept it, I think we were at 1.8 here because I really just wanted to show off how incredibly sharp and perfect things can be at 1.8. Because I think, you know, a lot of times we think 1.8 is risky. You know, we're depending on such a thin slice, but it can, while it can be risky, it can also be absolutely stunning. And this camera, especially with edge to edge sharpness, you know, you don't have to count 1.8. Oftentimes you think, yes, it's this slice that's 1.8, but really it's just like this area of this slice that's sharp. That's not the case here. And that allows you to take more risks and have more fun.
Yeah, total testament to the engineers, because it's almost like f1.8, as much as a physical thing as it is the photography, is a better 1.8 than I've ever seen. And, you know, we came out with, you know, just a few lenses in Z Nikkor. Now we have the triptych of 2.8 zooms, you know, 1424, 2470, and 7200. We'll talk about you using the 7200 in a little bit. But the 1.8 series not only keeps you in that place of compact and lightweight. I actually, for me, I was on a shoot with Chris Hirschman. We were doing video for the Z6 II on the launch of these cameras. And I shot his portrait with the 85-1.8. And it's not like you don't know this, but man, you pull it up in the computer and you just go, I can't believe what I'm seeing sometimes. And again, this is not the kind of stuff you can see specs on a piece of paper. This is just so gorgeous. I mean, as we keep rolling on, talk about this, what's your mindset, concept, all that stuff.
This is with the 35. I want to say it's at 2.8. I really like for my bride. So I think one of the reasons that brides are attracted to my work is that it's not, it doesn't scream old school wedding photographer, which is sort of what people expect when they start looking for photographers. And something I think clients like about me is you're going to get a little bit of everything with me. And so I always try to make sure that I'm taking a couple of very editorial, fun feeling photos for my brides. And so I had her stand in the middle of all these beautiful flowers and just kind of wave the fabric behind her and told her to think about her upcoming wedding. And uh, and this is what we got. I really wanted to show movement, and I think we got that here. And again, the camera did not fight me on that movement. It did not. I was on face focus here, and so with all that movement and all that contrast, it just stuck with her the entire time and did not, you know, the camera was definitely one with me and not fighting me at all on where I wanted it to focus.
Yeah, you know, I do. I shoot a lot of portraits like you. And what fascinates me even more is if the person turns away, you know, the tiny box on the eyes turns into a bigger box that stays
Yeah.
with the head. So the subject recognition, face recognition is still operating. And as soon as they turn back, the eyes are caught again, and the boxes appear on the eyes, or the box appears on the eye. And I find that fascinating. Again, it kind of goes back to what you said before. When you're not struggling over trying to set the camera or think about those settings, you're making better pictures. Now, in these moments, did you take advantage of the 14 frames per second? Because now the Z6 II will move a little bit faster than the Z6. Or did you stick with one frame at a time?
No, no, especially for this actually. So I will admit I made a bit of an error here where I had
No,
I
say it's not so.
I wasn't paying as much attention to how many images I had left on the card. So, and I was just firing away because she's moving and I want to make sure I get the one. And so I was just firing away and I was thrilled at like no buffer. It was amazing. And then all of a sudden it stopped and I was like, Mark Cutler, this camera just stopped. And he's like, no, impossible. You're wrong about this. So he took the camera from me and he's like, yeah, your card is full.
Did you just publicly admit you were wrong?
Don't tell everyone. We don't have to show this to everyone, do we?
No, we won't. We won't put it on the internet and nobody's going to see it. So don't worry about it. Okay. No, but that's fascinating. You just get so caught up and I could see that happening. That's very, very cool. So Chung, we talked about the dual card slots. I'm wondering if you use CF technology, CF Express technology at all. I got a couple of SanDiscs myself, and they work tremendous in these cameras. I know there's a firmware update for Z6 and Z7 as well to use CF Express. Is that a technology you're taking advantage of?
Yes. So I just got my first SanDisk CF Express card. Took me a little while to find a reader, but now that I have it, it's great. I don't know if you know this about me, but I like to talk about workflow a lot, and I am a person who likes to come home and cull a wedding or whatever I shoot immediately after. So even if I shoot a 16-hour wedding, I'm coming home and I'm going to cull through the whole thing before I go to bed. Mm-hmm. And the speed at which these things offload is ridiculous. So it's giving me time back in my life. So on top of it being great in the camera, fast and responsive, it's also amazing for my workflow.
Yeah, I can't wait to get back to concerts because I transmit images right from the concert, and everything moving faster in a pipeline makes every little bit of difference. And that's a great point to bring up. So those of you that are going to jump into CF Express technology, make sure you have a card reader that actually supports that card, because the older card readers are not up to date with that technology and most of them will not work. So don't think it's the card, it's the technology that's got to kind of come together. But beautiful, and thank you for sharing on this image. We're back to details again. This stuff is extraordinary, Charmy. Thank you for sharing. But talk about this image as we move forward. Is 8518 again?
It's 8518 again, at 18. I'm almost positive. Indian weddings are so ornate and there's so much going on that it can be tempting to really just dig into the emotions only and document just the chaos. But I think it's also really important to document the quiet moments and the details and things that my couples have, spent family time on selecting. And so I think getting in on these bracelets, this is a styled shoot, obviously, but, what you do at these styled shoots should be what you're doing at work anyway. And so this just really, I saw the bracelets through the flowers and I just knew I really had to shoot it.
Yeah. Does the focus zones in these mirrorless cameras mean a lot to you in Z6 II, where you get 90% coverage? Do you find yourself coming off the center to the edges of the frame? 90% coverage is unheard of. It's amazing. And I use it a lot in bird photography, believe it or not. But how important is that to you?
I have been historically the most frustrated person with focusing and recomposing because I really like strange compositions, and I will often have a lot of, negative space and have my subject be in a strange corner of the frame. And so having 90% coverage is making my life so much easier.
Yeah, it's a huge advantage. And I use it all the time.
Yeah. So also, there are so many focus points that I've actually turned my Z6 II down to half. So I'm only using half of them, and that's still giving me this amazing coverage of so many options that I'm finding that I am very rarely focusing and then recomposing. So
and that's another great point you bring up, because with more focusing points, you toggle through them. Now it moves rather quickly. I mean, it flies through, but still being able to jump from one to another with less points means you can move around the frame even that much quicker. We're talking in some instances microseconds or just split seconds, but every second makes a difference. And I'm glad you brought that up. And I'm so fascinated too, because earlier on, you brought up your intent of the color palette, because usually what I'm looking at from you is like golds, your reds, yellows, real pops of color, but you keep it all together here in this color palette, and it's just fascinating. The detail too, you're bringing out sharpness. And of course, having some beautiful models, beautiful man and a beautiful woman doesn't hurt. But where are we going here? What lens? I mean, we still in the same place? What's happening?
This is with the 85. I think we're still at 1.8. This is the beginning of me really playing with the new zone eye focus, wide area eye focus, because you get a new camera and you're like, all right, well, what can you really do? so you try to push it. So I was definitely using wide area eye focus here, and I had her focusing on other people at the time, but I really started asking her for movement, because shooting a beautiful model is great, but I really wanted something else. And so I think I was telling her some really nonsense dad jokes right here, and getting her to kind of lean forward with her laughter and left and right. And the eye focus was keeping up. Her eyes are incredibly sharp, and the detail in her jewelry is sharp. And so, all of that we've been talking about, the edge to edge focus and the eye focus locking so well, it all just came together here.
And you brought up one important technical point that I don't want to, step over, is you're shooting at 1.8. And when I interviewed Matthew Jordan Smith about his assignment, and Malik Sidibé, they're shooting models as well. And you would think that there's not a lot of movement, but at 1.8, if they slightly move and that focus doesn't keep up with them in that move, you got an out of focus image. I mean, again, if the eyes aren't sharp, more than likely you're not going to want that photo. So shooting that at 1.8, how's your confidence level at this point?
I mean, I knew already that we were solid. And so actually, I think the next image you're going to see, so this one I pushed it even more, because like I said, I had a new camera in my hands. I wanted to test it out and see what it could do. So here I very intentionally told her, lean all the way back, and then lean all the way forward, and lean all the way back, lean all the way forward. And I told her to keep it going. And so very intentionally, she was doing a fairly, quick movement back and forth, and the eye focus was keeping up. And that's how we ended up with this. So, I was already confident, but then I decided to push my luck, and I got lucky.
Look at that. You got lucky, or we have engineers that have mastered this AF system so well. Maybe it's a little bit of both. Your talent and the engineers coming together with this box in front of you to make these amazing pictures. Again,
I really love those engineers right now.
Yeah, they really pop. And again, it goes back to, all kidding aside, the confidence of the camera, being able to shoot quickly, being able to trust and rely. And we're not even outdoors, because these cameras are weather sealed like you wouldn't believe. But there's so much that goes on. It just blows my mind that, you really have to use a product to understand its value and its capabilities. And beginning to end here, you got some amazing pictures. So we get a little bit tighter here. Where are we?
Yeah, this is still the 85. 85 1.8. This is probably a 2.2.
Mm-hmm.
And texture, like I said, I wanted to see how the camera would handle this monochromatic look and still give us all this detail, and how much detail you can get when there's not a lot of like stark color difference. It's really just the camera grabs the texture so well. And so yeah, I was pushing it here with one of those painted leaves and just trying to see where I was going to get. And I had her moving the painted leaf a little bit to see if the camera would lose her eye. Cause I wasn't in wide area eye focus here. I was in auto area eye focus here. And I had her moving the leaf to see if the camera would lose her eye, and it didn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's amazing. And again, just, it kind of reminds me of thinking about this and these interviews that we've done. We're doing it with a Z6. I'm using the auto AFF and that technology within video now to have that is great. The Z6 is working great here, keeping us sharp, keeping me sharp. And again, you can't understate how important that is, that these cameras respond the way they do so quickly and so efficiently. I love this. Did you just grab flowers from the other decorations and drop them in as a headpiece? Where is Charmy Pena taking it here in the way of creative?
So I feel like, I was told wedding photos, that's the assignment. But I think always when I have the opportunity, I want to like push the boundaries of what a wedding photo is and what bridal photos look like. And I think that's what this was about. So I had told my decorator friend, I had this idea. I was like, I want to put something on her head. And he thought I was crazy at first, but I was like, no, really, like I want a headpiece for her that's all floral and just a little bit over the top. Mm-hmm. So he made this for me. He made her, it was kind of like a flower helmet. Mm-hmm. And it went right on her head and it curved right around her face. And we played with it a little bit until the positioning was just right. And then we had these bells that were kind of random that we originally intended to use as a belt. But I thought just like wrapped up her arm and to have that detail and something a little bit different would be fun. And so it still got that very Indian bride feel, but pushed to a different edge. And so I knew we were going to have fun with this texture, and she's such a beautiful model. But what was really fun was to use the 70-200.
Wait a minute, do tell. Are you not the fixed focal length woman? And I know you've talked about zooms before and your fascination with fixed focal length. Talk a little bit about 70-200. This Z lens, again, to me, it's just, a little bit of everything. Close focus capabilities, the zoom range 70-200 takes 2 teleconverters. It's a very powerful, versatile lens, especially for the wedding market. But seriously, take it away in what your thoughts are and how you've used the zoom, and now you're in love with zooms, right?
But I love the 70-200.
It's totally cool. That's why we make fixed focal length lenses.
That's right. me and the rest of the zooms will have a conversation, but the 70-200. So as a wedding photographer, you always think like a 70-200 inside is a no. And that's no longer true with the 70-200 because the close focusing distance, it makes it a usable lens inside and in such like beautiful, amazing ways. So this was inside and I couldn't have been more than a couple feet away from her with the 70-200. So we had an eyeliner in between us, and that was about all that was in between us. And I've come to really love that 70-200. The technology that is in that lens makes it not the typical zoom lens to me.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think you bring up a good point, 2.8 versus 1.8, having the extra light, coming through the lens and everything, which makes me want to sort of just, brag on the Z6 II and Z mirrorless system in general. Having 5 stops of VR built into the camera, that works in tandem with lenses that have VR built in as well. So, taking every advantage indoors that you possibly could. Did an interview with Michelle Valberg, a wildlife photographer, and she said she's shooting a 60th of a second with a 2x converter at 1,000 millimeters, with this combination of the Z7200. So, bragging on that a little bit as well. But I love what you've done here. And so, do you go into this shoot thinking, I'm going to put this flower bed around her head and make this work with the bells, or did you do that on the fly?
No, we did that on the fly for sure. I think, when you bring together a good amount of options and make sure you have florals and clothing and accessories, I think once you put it out on a table, you just, especially if you're attracted to that kind of stuff, like I've always been interested in yes, photography, but also fashion and interiors and just kind of how things work together. You see this stuff and you immediately are like, this stuff belongs together. And some of it is trial and error. Sometimes you pick something and you're like, let's try this. And then you shoot it and immediately, we should stop trying this. And I think, this was completely on the fly, but it just worked out so perfectly.
Yeah, see, I would pretty much say that outside of long telephoto, I'm a zoom guy, really long telephoto. I mean 800, 1600 millimeters. But I've been using the Z7200 a ton. To me, the bokeh, the sharpness, you mentioned the close focus. That's a huge thing, with this lens. And you pull it off so well. I love intimate moments like this. And are you still with the 7200 here?
No, I think I switched back to the 85 for this one. I think just for this one, I think there's a couple more 7200s to come.
So this is typically what you do on a day. You'd get some of these intimate photos between the bride and groom?
Absolutely. I would say, on a typical wedding day, I have an 85 on one hip and a 35 on the other. And I know those focal lengths so well that with my eyes closed, I could tell you what the frame will look like and where it will start and where it will end. And it's one of the things that I like about shooting primes is that I'm not fumbling for my frame with the camera to my face. I already know, I have muscle memory for those focal lengths, and I already know what a 35 frame looks like, and I know what an 85 frame looks like. And so when I am shooting, I'm not thinking about those. I already know. And so I focus on the couple and their connection and, making sure that I'm taking in the detail of her hand and the sindoor. Sindoor represents that she's a married woman, and just bringing all those elements together with the right emotion, because I already know what the frame's going to look like. I don't have to think about that.
Beautiful. So beautifully done.
All right.
Keep going. Let's close out. We got a couple more images, right? Let's just keep rolling.
So the last three kind of go together. This was at the 7200. This is at f8. I know a lot of wedding photographers might not push their cameras to f8, but f8 can give you a lot. So I was using wide area eye focus here, and the painted leaves, I really wanted to show off the painted leaves and these two side by side. So after a little bit of struggle of getting them side by side, I also wanted to, get some variety. And I think a lot of people think, I'm standing in one place, they're standing in one place, how much variety can I get? But there's so much emotion to get out of people. And so this is where we started. We started with, hey guys, just don't move, but kind of try to look at each other and laugh. And then
we move on.
Yep. So this was less about them and more about showing off the leaves. I really like the graphic element of the leaves kind of reaching towards each other. So there are more accessories to the leaves in this one for me, but it's definitely a very editorial fun look. And so we tried this and then this one. So this one's definitely more about them, but they're such a beautiful couple. And this just works for how stunning they are and how they both have this great jawline and the leaves kind of cut off exactly what needs to be cut off and shows off all of these little details about them, about their jewelry, about the clothing. And this is the one that you guys use to show off the wide area eye focus, which is what I was using.
I love it. And you bring back using the 35 and the 85 as the two lenses, two camera bodies. I almost feel like I can actually make it through a day. Sometimes you weigh yourself down with too much gear And I think the compact, lightweight system, I mean, you're getting the quality you need, you're getting the speed you need, you're getting the ISO you need here, and to have that lightweight, I think makes a big difference. I mean, if I shoot a full concert and I'm shooting with old, heavier cameras versus now the mirrorless cameras, I make it to the shoot with no back problems. And, it's not to say that that happens all the time, but it does create a fatigue factor. Talk to me real quick, though. The very first picture I'm going to toggle back to, black and white. Why black and white? And did you shoot it in camera, or did you make the decision to change it to black and white in post?
I made the decision to change it afterwards. I love their emotion here, and I felt like the color was kind of getting in the way. And that was the decision maker. The decision maker was, I love color, and most of my work, if you go look at it, it's in color. But in this particular image, I felt like the color was standing as a distraction to the feeling, and so I wanted it gone.
Beautiful, because then when we do get over to the color, it's a great choice. I use the monochrome mode in the picture controls all the time, but you're right. There are times you get into light and the colors aren't working, the light balance isn't working, so it's an easier move to go to black and white, something monochromatic that would just really pop with the darks and the lights, the blacks and the whites, and the range. But this is phenomenal. This has been great. Certainly, as always, I enjoy talking with you about photography. I like to talk to you about everything, really. It's been crazy during this pandemic, and I know, we've been doing everything we can to stay creative and try to get back into the groove. I remember you were the first person I heard to say, I went and shot my first micro wedding, which is a challenge in itself, trying to move forward in weddings. So I'm glad that wedding photographers are starting to get back into business, and hope the pandemic doesn't rise enough to hold that up. But your first world experience is very appreciated. Certainly the quality and the beauty of your photography is very appreciated. I'm sure everybody else who's tuned in agrees with me. So thank you so much for your time, Charmy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And those of you tuning in, we hope you enjoyed this. Some real world experience from Charmy Pena with the Z6 II. Really great settings, talking about how she has used the camera. So if you missed any part of this, go back, rewind, and watch it again. Check out NikonUSA.com and the Creators Hour for more interviews that we've done on assignment with other ambassadors and photographers that have used the Z6 II and Z7 II. We really appreciate your time. We want everybody to get out there and keep shooting, shoot some beautiful things, share them with us, share them with the world. For Nikon, I'm Mike Corrado. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.